Kia ora and welcome everybody to another episode of Big Life Mindset. Life hacks and strategies so you love life more. My name is Eri Rakanui and this podcast is in the top 10% most shared worldwide on Spotify. I'm a leadership coach for winners of the Westpac Bank Innovation Awards. I've won numerous competitions through Toastmasters and I've held roles at management, co-founder and board levels. But above everything else, I'm living a life that I absolutely love. Today's episode is one out of the box because not only are we in a different venue, as you'll be able to see on Spotify and YouTube, but I have a special guest with me. I have a special guest. Her name is Natalie Ferguson. Now, before I dive into who Natalie is and what she does, I wanted to add that this is part of the Living Your Passion series. So those of you that are familiar with this series will know that we host a female guest who talks about some of the challenges that women face when chasing their passions. Now, Natalie's got quite a unique insight into this based on the organization that she's helped co-found. So super looking forward to this. And I've just mentioned to her before that I'm an absolute fanboy of what they do as well. So without further ado, kia ora, Natalie, how are you?
Great, how are you?
I'm hot now.
Yeah, I was going to say we were worried about this room. Now we've got it in our heads. We can't control the temperature.
Yeah. So as I take my jersey,
we'll just slowly strip throughout the podcast.
Okay, so who's Natalie Ferguson?
So, the big question,
Yeah.
Who am I? It's funny, I think we share quite a similar philosophy on life. I think it's so important to live your best life however you can. And I started doing that very, very young. I've always, and I think I blame my parents for this, always been someone who challenged the norm, forged my own path, questioned everything. I'm probably a wildly irritating person to be around. All the way from, I went to a great school down the road, Onslow College.
Yay!
And I had some incredible teachers who taught me a lot about critical thinking. And I remember a history teacher who taught us New Zealand history and was like, now let's put the textbooks aside and tell you the real story kind of thing. Didn't love university and just set out building my own businesses and deciding how I wanted to live and building a life that gave me flexibility and the structure that I wanted and the income that I wanted and the work that I wanted and the flexibility that I wanted. And so I've continued to do that my whole career and then ended up starting a very successful startup about 5 years ago with a couple of great people around financial literacy. It was an investing platform called Hatch that enabled us to have a massive impact on the wealth of New Zealanders, which was just such an incredible thing to work on. And then we got acquired, so left that and now starting using all those skills, using the behavioural change, all the small habit stuff, all the stuff that works for money also works for building leadership skills and navigating your career how you want to, which I just think is such a big challenge for people to get the life that they want.
Holy cow, I think we could wrap that up there, folks. That's
Done.
Amazing. That's how you do it. Awesome. We're fortunate that we can catch up today because you're also based in Wellington, right?
Yeah.
Nice. Whereabouts in Wellington you live?
I'm in Newtown.
Awesome. And are you born and bred Wellington? Like, so you went to Onslow. Have you spent some time overseas as well? Or?
Yeah, I was a military brat, so I was born in Lincoln
wow.
Hospital, yes, and my dad actually did a flyover. He was the head of the Red Checkers, which was the stunt team.
Awesome.
And so they did a flyover of the hospital. He wasn't in the hospital when my mum was giving birth, but they did a flyover. So we travelled around a lot as children. I went from Lincoln to Johnsonville to Alabama to Auckland.
Alabama, US, Alabama.
Yeah.
Holy.
Back to Auckland and then to London and then landed in Wellington by the time I was 12. So I'd moved around an awful lot. Yeah. And then we stayed here. I remember at about 16, Dad was like, we could go to Washington, and I cried. I'd loved it up until then, but I'd finally got this group of friends. It was halfway through high school. I'd had a really rough time coming here, 12-year-old girls and not always, they weren't very nice to me. So I just didn't want to do it again.
Yeah, totally understandable. And then at 16 to look at moving. So did you end up moving to Washington?
No, they actually decided not to. I don't know if it was because I cried. I'm sure it wasn't. But I think they just realised we'd set up a good life here. And then we've all actually stayed around in the area. But I, up until COVID, had part of building my own life was travelling around a lot. And it feels terrible because of climate change. But I just love Wellington so much for the lifestyle. But I do think for me, I have to get out of it a lot to really appreciate it and see the world and all these amazing things that other countries have to offer as well.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that's one of the things. Everybody says they love Wellington at some stage, right? Well,
yeah.
Most people. But I think you can appreciate it more once you've been out and about. Like, once you actually get out of that bubble and say, geez, this is what's going on in the rest of the world. And you come back to Wellington, which is compact, it's cool vibe, cafe culture, all those kind of things. And everything's really accessible too. So.
Yeah, and I just believe so much in New Zealand. I think New Zealanders are extremely patriotic, but we're just this tiny island nation that could build utopia. I really think we can, which is why I always end up thinking, let's just try again. Let's try something else and see what we can do.
Nice. And have you got more family around Wellington?
Yeah, all my family, all my immediate family's around Wellington. I have a sister in Silverstream. She's got about 4 kids. Another sister in Kandala, and then my parents now split their time between Martinborough and Wellington Central. They've bought an apartment.
Oh, amazing.
And so they've moved into town, which is like pretty fun because I'll just pop in quite regularly now and have a wine.
Yeah. How are they finding the move or the transition between town and Martinborough? Because that's quite different.
They love it.
Really, like, very, in case you're not familiar with Martinborough, that's like quite a
country.
It's a quiet place, right?
It's a winery area. This is what I mean. I blame my parents for how I think about the world. They very particularly built a lifestyle that they want in retirement. So they have, they've got this beautiful country community they hang out in. And then this was a bit of a risk to get an apartment in town. They've never lived in an apartment. And it was like they bought it off the plan. So it's been about 3 years because of all the COVID stuff. So I think when they went to move in, they were like, oh, we probably won't spend a lot of time here. Now they're addicted to it. I think
really?
I think they just love being able to just pop out and go out to the restaurants and got new walking, Wellington is just this incredible town bout that all these different walks and stuff. So, so I think they really like it, and their friends come in, and that just a very different kind of socializing.
Cool.
They had an open house on their floor last night, so they had all their floor over for drinks. And
that's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't even realise that's a thing.
Well, yeah, I was down in Christchurch yesterday, and communal housing, it's my dream now.
Awesome.
I went to this incredible place, and then seeing my parents with their floor, I was like, that's what it is. It's about rebuilding community now. I think we got all too isolated, and now we're trying to switch that.
Yeah. I think you see a lot of that. I mean, an example for us is, so we bought our family home. My wife and I bought my family home about 8 or 9 years ago. When I was a kid, we used to play cricket like across the street. The next, or the people across the road, their letterbox were the wickets, and now our street is like one of those arterial roads. And it's not so much just the fact of the volume of traffic, but it's disconnected a community. Like it's just literally cut right through it.
Yeah.
And so I think I take more enjoyment now out of hanging out with my neighbours. The neighbours that we've got to either side of us, or particularly the ones on our left. I think it took us about a decade to speak to them.
I still haven't met mine. Isn't that terrible?
It's fuzzy, eh?
So as I say, not as I do.
How does that even happen? Like, we're literally living next door to somebody, not engaging with them, and then since we just have so much to do with each other now.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on each other, like passing things over the fence. The kids love it because they're always getting, chips, chocolate and everything else. But just that sense of community that you can foster, even with like that infrastructure that takes place. Like it takes a little bit more effort, I think, than what it used to. But I also think we didn't value it as highly back in the day.
It was just a thing. I think everyone just did. And this is a story of terrible resilience, but I contacted my neighbours once. I saw one out in the street and I was like, hey, and they're like, what? Hi. What do you want? And I was like, I'm just your neighbour. And I just thought I'd say hi. And they sort of looked at me, blanked me, and sort of went, okay. And I've never tried again. But I actually should. This is a good reminder. It's so nice and you've got that little bit of, I live alone, so it's quite nice to have that security and people to rely on. And okay, good. I'll have an action to take away from this.
Nice. And just be connected with our surroundings sometimes. Yeah. It's so easy because we're all, everybody's doing the things, and if you've got a purpose and you're kind of focusing all your effort and attention towards that, and then you kind of forget, like, this is a person that literally lives, like, I could...
Within meters.
Like, we could high-five each other on the morning or something, but you just don't have that take place. So you're in Newtown?
Yes.
That is that is a community. Whenever I spent the first couple of years, not long, in Newtown, but... even then, like, that sense of community in Newtown is not something that you see in a lot of other places.
Mm-hmm. Community and diversity, and those are the reasons that I picked it. because there's a lot of suburbs that you could go to that are nice and they're tidy and there's nice schools. I don't have any children, so that wasn't that big a deal for me. But there's something about Newtown and seeing all people, all socio-economic backgrounds, different cultures, different lifestyles. There's people who've lived there forever and people who are just moving through, a lot of students. And there's something because of my background, I've done a lot of user experience and research. There's something in not getting trapped in your bubble. And I think for me, it's an everyday reminder of we're all different, we all have different attitudes and beliefs, and it's cool to be in amongst it rather than sort of around people who look and act like you all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. That breadth of diversity that you get in Newtown, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's very real.
Yeah.
You just, like all those different segments, I guess, that you just described, it packed into one suburb, one area of town. I love it.
It's very unique like that, I think. It's going to be hard to leave. I've been there for about 10 years and I want to, because I feel like I've never lived in a house this long. 10 years and I'm almost 40. So I've lived a quarter of my life there. Oh my God. And so I want to leave, but it's really hard to find a better spot. Really, than where I'm at.
Newlands is the thriving metropolis of Wellington, I might add.
Yeah, Newlands is pretty cool.
If you like the wind and the fog, you're welcome.
I like fog.
Yeah, well, we've got heat.
I could pass up on wind.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about Powrsuit.
Powrsuit will be a leadership platform for women. We are about 6 months in now, so we left Hatch, which, like I said, we'd had this meaningful impact on behaviour change when it came to investing and people's attitudes, these really deeply held myths about money and people feeling really bad at it and these perceptions of it being a man's world and all that sort of stuff. And we'd changed that for New Zealanders. So when it was time to leave, we sort of finally put our heads up for the first time in 5 years. You know, you've got this single track mind for 5 years. And we were really shocked to see that on the women in leadership stats, they'd actually slid backwards in the time that we'd been making all this progress on financial literacy. So over COVID was a particularly damaging time. There was a lot of great progress that was made with flexible work and all that sort of stuff. But the leadership gap, and so that's the number of women in positions like CEO positions, C-level positions and board positions had actually dropped because, and we were experiencing at the same time the biggest ever mass resignation of women because they'd burnt out. They were taking on way more of the household load, especially when the world locked down. They were feeling underappreciated and under-acknowledged at work, and they were just saying the cost-benefit doesn't add up anymore. And for us, we'd spent far too long at Hatch on women. It wasn't necessarily a huge money earner for us, but we just believed so passionately in it. So, and there's a wealth gap as well. There's all sorts of gaps. And for us, this was just such a obvious to dig into. And I always say now we kind of gaslit ourselves because I was like, isn't women kind of done? Like we've been talking about women and the gender gap for so long now. And there's all these other minority groups that have other very big challenges. And so we were sort of like, oh, is that going to feel a bit tacky or a bit over it and kind of put people off? But we scratched beneath the surface. We've done now hundreds of interviews with women, with leaders, with all sorts of people, and realized the problem's even bigger than we thought. And there are so we spent 6 months getting some really concrete problem statements, really. So all of these interviews we've done, we've now managed to define 5 very common career styles women take. And that's not like a persona or an archetype or a way of being. It's just these different styles we jump into day to day, week to week. If you have a terrible manager, if you're having kids, if you have a really good opportunity that we can jump between, that all have unique barriers, beliefs, behaviors, imposter syndrome, things like perceptions, limiting beliefs about yourself.
Yeah.
So what we're aiming to do now is to roll out our pilot program, which is going to be a very manual trial with organizations of what we hope to deliver eventually as a tech platform. So our goal is, at the moment, you've got kind of 2 styles of professional development. One is that kind of generic, traditional professional development that everyone goes to. It's incredibly good. You get all sorts of general knowledge and understanding. When you get up to senior levels, you often get offered targeted leadership development programs that are extremely expensive. It could be coaching, it could be courses, and they're often $3,000 to $5,000 plus. We want to democratize that and make that sort of level of targeted professional leadership development available to all women on the way up. So thinking a price tag of about $100 a month or something across the world, where you can connect with like-minded women in similar situations. You get structured learning, you get this amazing peer network, because that's a key thing for women to be able to reach the success they want to reach. And then also advice, coaching, delivered in a way that is affordable and achievable. It's a pragmatic way for organizations and individuals to be able to invest in it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's who we are.
Yeah. I can't believe Powrsuit's only been there for 6 months, did you say?
Yeah.
That's incredible. You are so middle of the radar on my LinkedIn feed. I swear, every time I open it up, Powrsuit.
We're very busy.
You are very busy, very active. You're very active, very proactive.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about, this challenge that you're seeing, and I think a lot of people probably slept on it, just thinking, oh yeah, well we've done the gender gap thing, we've done the pay gap thing, haven't we? I mean, that's already sorted, isn't it?
We've done some diversity training.
Yeah, we ticked that box, but what you found was actually that wasn't the case. We'd gone backwards. Why do you think we'd gone backwards?
So there's a couple of things. I think from an organizational perspective, there is diversity training and unconscious bias training is now the norm. And while they're amazing, I liken them to taking one yoga class. It's a practice. It's not a one-off thing. So I think that's been treated almost as a one and done. Great, it's solved now. And that's actually really counterproductive because now you've got a big problem that everyone thinks is solved that's not solved.
Yeah.
From a societal perspective, there's this really interesting, we're going through this really interesting time where it feels like we've had 10 years of investing in women, and it feels like women have gotten all sorts of quotas and extra help and support, and there's a big push from a lot of people, quite rightly, because they're looking at it from their perspective going, what's in it for me? And now it's feeling exactly what we felt, is this real awkward or tension, and why should women get way more help? And so there's a real pushback against that, and we can dig into that a bit more because it's the wrong perception, but I understand why people have it. And then there's also just deeply held cultural norms. And I think we talk about women in leadership. Firstly, the first thing we found out very strongly is women don't necessarily have the same perception of success as the traditional sort of narrow definition of leader that we have around. And actually men don't either. It's just like we will say, the patriarchy is terrible for everyone. Men are expected to go to work, earn the paycheck still in 2023, and even to the point I've spoken to women who didn't find out for a year that the men that they worked with had children, because the men felt really strongly that they had to have this work-life separation. They were trapped in that perception that to be a strong leader, they had to leave life at home. Flexible work, which is just coming into play, has incredibly good advantages, but it actually has disadvantages when it's not rolled out very well. And so women often find they are the biggest beneficiaries of it, because they are often, I think some of the stats are around 95% of women say that they are responsible for their kids' daily needs, and about 45% of men say they are. So both of those stats are self-reported, and I expect they are slightly more towards women. So if you are now left out of different meetings and different events because you're in and that day-to-day office chat, so there's actually some downsides to that, and so women can get overlooked. We've got the day-to-day household load. Even if you don't have children, women are much more likely to do a lot more of the housework, which means things like taking spontaneous work drinks is just not always a thing. It's actually really rooted in a gender stereotype that's been around for a long time, of that, men just go out for drinks after work and there's someone at home taking care of everything else. So that's another disadvantage. Again, it's a career limiting disadvantage. Not saying it's a stopping, but it's a limiting. It's a handbrake, another handbrake. And then we have all the just nuances around feedback culture. Women receive about 22% less constructive feedback than men. And
that's a lot.
Yep, and 20% more about our personalities. So we're much more likely to have a manager tell us, oh, you need to work on your executive presence, or you come across as too emotional. You can't action that. What am I meant to do with that? Whereas men will get a lot more about, this is specifically what you need to do. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. One of which is, again, going back to this networking, because women are less networked as well. We build incredible social networks. However, we don't translate them often to work. And we've been doing a bunch of pilots for Powrsuit, and found just putting a bunch of women in a room for an hour and asking them guided questions about career challenges, they come away going, I've never actually done this before. I've never had a group of women around me, or a safe place to talk about this. And so that alone is extremely powerful. But what it also means when it comes to feedback is men might get about 10 pieces of feedback a week. unofficially, as they're going through their networks, as they're chatting with other people, whereas women don't get that feedback. So imagine being a manager and you've given a man and a woman the same piece of feedback. The man takes it really well because it's one of the 10 things he's heard about himself that week. And this is the first time a woman's heard anything about herself. So she puts so much more weight on it. She reacts not super well. Now the manager feels uncomfortable giving her feedback. They resort to this personality-based feedback and it creates this spiral. So what we've started to realize is this stuff is not obvious anymore. It's not massively outwardly focused discrimination. It's just these nuanced things that spiral into things that limit women's ability to succeed on their terms at work.
And so have we kind of sleepwalked into some of these situations, have we? Like you're talking about, it's not a conscious thing, or perhaps it's not a structured approach that people have been taking. It's simply, this has been allowed to unfold and it's continuing to unfold.
Yeah, I think we all have unconscious bias.
Yep.
Women do too. And this is some of the way this argument is often framed with the patriarchy as man blaming. And it's not. If there is 100% of women at the top, which by the way, 90% of CEOs in the biggest companies in the world are men. So virtually 100%. If there was flipped, it would be equally as bad. Like that's not the goal. We want 50-50. 50-50 has all sorts of great benefits. So I think we all have unconscious bias, and the yucky thing about unconscious bias is that we're not aware of it. So we go into situations with preconceived ideas, and we both just talked about it on the way in. You hear someone speaking and you have a visual of what you have an internal vision of what you think they look like, and It's often completely wrong. We all have it. So I don't think we've been sleepwalking. I think there's just some huge level of vulnerability that needs to come when you start to question the way you think about the world. And as a white woman, I have to do it too. Like, we recognize with Powrsuit that we are 2 white women starting it, and the intersectionality of race, culture, sexuality, all of those things are other different minorities that we don't all experience. We probably have unconscious bias about, and we need to proactively challenge that bias. And most of us haven't been. Have you been given? You probably have, because you've been in this area, but most people aren't equipped with that tools. We've got our defenses raised because we feel attacked, because we've been told we're wrong and we're bad and we're holding people back, and it's not conducive to change. So people sort of avoid it and sort of put their heads in the sand and go, well, we're trying, what do you want from me?
Where do you think you've made some of the biggest gains with Powrsuit?
Well, we actually have about 17% of our audience are men, and we often get these really lovely messages from them saying, maybe I'm a woman because this really resonates with me. And it's actually just the same thing that, again, with the patriarchy, there's one narrow definition of leadership, and all of us want to see a change in the face of leadership. We want to see the 7 different styles there actually are take up much more space. So we've got different goals to look for, different approaches to model, more visibility of different styles that appeal to everyone. So I think that's one of the first big signs of progress for us, is that there is this incredible group of men who are diving in, and our biggest advocates and our biggest supporters, and will tell us from a man's perspective, in quotation marks, what other men might perceive some of the things we say as, so that we can really make sure we're not stepping on toes and blaming and all that sort of stuff. The other thing we found is tiny actions, and you're a big fan of this too. So we've had a newsletter and a podcast for about 5 months now, and every week in our newsletter, free newsletter, we have one big article and one 30-second action. And the vast majority of the people who read our newsletter do that action every week or most weeks. And so they're rolling out these really small little changes. So it could be anything from opening up your LinkedIn and messaging someone you admire to going having a coffee, or putting in 30 minutes in your calendar literally just to sit back and focus on a challenge you personally have that week. So really small changes. And we're getting immense amounts of feedback from, we've built an audience of around 3,000. We might be getting up towards 4,000 now.
That's amazing.
Women. Yeah, well, it really resonates. This really does resonate with people, saying you've made a meaningful impact on my confidence. I used to feel overwhelmed and now I feel in control, or I used to think I was a great multitasker and now I realize I'm just exhausted and anxious at the end of each day, and I've made this tangible difference, just this one action, and that's creating this positive spiral. So pretty cool stuff for 6 months.
Huge. Like I said, I can't believe you've only been going for 6 months, like only 6 months. You mentioned like 5 types of, not personas, but kind of 5 types of styles. What are they?
Okay, so we start with, and these are in no particular order, by the way.
Cool.
We start with the steward, and this style is often you have a very strongly competing external priority. So people default to kids because that's quite often the case with mothers of young children. But it could also be you've got a really strong community commitment or a hobby, like you might be a triathlete or something, and that's your passion and goal in life. And work for the moment is part of life, but not your full life. So you're really juggling it. And that means you might have a focus on bringing in income, and that's cool. But you may not be currently super committed to rising up the ranks or anything. And that comes with its own challenges. You feel guilty leaving work early. You feel guilty working from home. You feel like you don't have the opportunity to develop professionally because you're not putting enough time in. There's all sorts of stuff around that. So that's the first group. By the way, all of those things are limiting beliefs. There's definitely ways you can change that. The second group we call the searcher, and that is a group of people who are fierce believers in women and feminism, and that women should be represented at all levels of leadership. They are the biggest allies and supporters, but personally lack huge amounts of confidence. So they see the path to the top, they see and believe that women should get there, but they can't see their place on it. So they are likely to come across as quite passive. They don't put their hand up for strategic opportunities. They may be hugely operationally important for the organization. They're very, very good at project management, time management. They're very, very capable, but they don't necessarily make strategic moves. And it's very easy to see them as being not ambitious or too much of a doer and not a leader, but it tends to be down to they just can't quite get over that next hurdle and know their next step. And that's really holds them back confidence-wise.
So that's the supporter, did you say?
The searcher.
The searcher. Yeah. So the steward, the searcher. Cool.
Then we have the scout, and they have closed their eyes, held their nose and taken the jump, and they have put their hand up. They are likely to put their hand up for lots of opportunities. They probably found themselves in a position that they don't feel like they have 100% of the skills for, and they feel completely unsupported. So they blame themselves for that. So they may not be getting some coaching that they need. They may not be getting backing from their team members because they've taken a different approach. They may feel like they're failing with their team, and their biggest challenge is they've applied the same skills they've taken to get there to where they're going next. So they will just take on more and more work. They will do more and more of the doing. They might seem like a micromanager because their approach that's got them there has been to just take on the load and get it done. So they're burning out. They might be getting in everyone's nerves because they are taking on too much, and they just actually need to make the transition from doer to leader and need support and help doing that on their terms. And they don't want to do it by being super assertive necessarily. They may be an empathetic leader, but they don't have any models in their life of what that looks like. And so they just feel like they're failing all over the show. They're probably, very close to burnout. Despite
the progress, the career progress, if you define it as that, despite that progress that they've made,
they feel like they're failing now. And they, weirdly with that group, outwardly, they look extremely successful. So quite often their managers and leaders will look at them as a high performer and say, this person's nailing it. But internally, they're really struggling, and they're struggling in silence because they don't think they can ask for help. That's quite a common one, and that group is often overlooked for professional development because they look like they're doing it all, but they are really struggling. Then that's the scouts, right? Yeah, that's the scout. Then we have the pathfinder, and this is sort of utopia. And we all have had women like this in our lives, strong leaders, empathetic leaders. They've made it to really good positions. They are lifting other women up. They have seen the barriers in their path and they're trying to break them down. The one challenge, these women, two challenges. One is still structural. There's still structural barriers in their path, but they see them and they're confident and they're capable and they're addressing them as they can. But the second one is they have been confident most of their career, or if not just the last few years. So they look at these less confident women who are struggling and don't always relate to how they behave because they've never behaved like that. So they're desperately trying to lift them up, but they just sometimes could get a bit frustrated by, why aren't you doing what I would do in that situation, especially when you bring in generational differences. So there's that group. And then we have the trailblazers, and that group tends to believe, and rightly or wrongly, that gender has not played a role in their career, and that they have made it to where they've made it on without any specific challenges related to gender. They feel almost resentful of the idea that there is a gender issue, and they often are, because they are quite successful as well, they're often pointed out as the exception to the rule, and they find that really like challenging because they want to feel like they made it on their merit rather than because they're a woman. So they have very successful again. I mean, most of these people, most of these styles end up getting where they want to go. Very successful, but really have this challenge and tension with the idea of gender, and so they can often come across, they often just don't relate to some of the other styles, and so there's a bit of a tension there.
I was going to ask that question. So I'll just run those through again. There's the steward, there's the seeker, there's the scout, there's the pathfinder, and then there's the trailblazer.
Yeah, wow, you've got a good memory.
Yeah, it helps having the fingernails clean. I
was going to say great nail polish.
Yeah, it's a combination of children. Anywho, do you find any styles are naturally drawn to others? I mean, you kind of describe the trailblazer as not really resonating with the others, but are there any styles kind of drawn to each other, and they kind of see a natural home there as well, or they're more understanding of what that person's going through?
Well, what we found is actually most women have moved between a lot of these. So it's actually, when you actually point them out clearly, because we've sent these out to a bunch of people and they've gone either, oh, I recognize that in one of my team members, if they're a man, or most women are like, oh, yep, that's me, or that used to be me and now I've worked my way here. So they can kind of, providing this framework helps you take it away from this feeling of I'm alone and I'm struggling, or I've got these unique challenges, to, oh, this is just in relation to my style, and so many other people have the same situation as me. So I feel like that's the way most people tend to relate to them. But what we do find is, for example, the example of a really bad dynamic with a manager, you could easily go from a pathfinder back to a scout, because you might, when I say back to a scout, because you've gone from being really confident and in control to suddenly feeling overwhelmed and falling back on old habits. So that's how we feel like these styles really resonate with women, rather than, because most women we've spoken to, actually virtually all women we've spoken to, want to support other people, and it's just whether or not they see it as a gender thing or otherwise.
Right. And so what kind of structures do you see, actually, before I ask that, so that's kind of in a career type lens, is that right?
Yes.
And how much of would you see in their personal and private lives would influence the style that you're seeing in that career?
Yeah, so I think that's the having a young family, having an interest, how you were raised, I think also has a big impact. Massive external influences. Even if you think about in a workplace, seeing other women leaders be successful and that you admire and strive to be like, has an impact. So all of these are hugely influenced. And I think that's the thing we want to really highlight, is women are guilty of internalizing our challenges and feeling like we're responsible, whereas actually these styles really highlight that we are all influenced by our environment. And that's one of the reasons Powrsuit exists, is because if you have more visible leadership styles with more visible diversity, then people can start to go, oh, okay, I'm just in this boat and I know what I need to do to sort of get to the next stage. And I don't feel like an idiot, and I don't feel like I'm doing everything wrong. I just know what I need now.
Do you see that there's similarities in how they're supported, like within an organization? Are there some ways that organizations empower and support people that work better for some of those styles than others?
Well, we are doing, at the moment with our pilots, we are doing gendered professional development, gendered leadership development, and that's had a little bit of pushback, which is quite interesting, because I think there is a perception in New Zealand especially of fairness and that everyone should get access to everything. So one thing that we would push really strongly for is to break that myth, because most professional development is still built around tools that work in a traditional sense. So they are geared very well to things that make white males successful. And we are very clear on, we're not here to fix women, we are here to give women a playbook that works for them. And so recognizing the different challenges that different people bring to work, be it that they have a family at home, be it that they have other caregiving requirements, whatever those challenges are, targeted support, not fixing, support that recognizes and takes into account those needs and helps people build their own playbook of how to navigate their career with those needs in play. So that's one of the huge things we think we can do. Second thing is, I think even with these styles, we're going to start to make them available fairly soon, is for leaders to be really vulnerable. And I think the other line we've started to pull on for unsuspecting organizations is if you don't have a gender balance at every level of your organization, you've got work to do. And it's okay to acknowledge that, because what we're doing hasn't been enough for the last 20 years. We've made huge progress, but it's been way too slow. And so just being really open-minded about asking people what they need. And I mean, both of us have a lot of experience talking to very diverse people. I just come out of 2 weeks of interviews, and the thing that opens my eyes every time you talk to people is everyone is fundamentally different. Like, I think most people think we're all fundamentally the same with small differences, but it's actually the opposite. And everyone has such different motivations and things they want out of life. So being a vulnerable, empathetic leader, which is what we need in the knowledge economy, by the way, like the way we've got to this position in the world is not the way we're going to navigate climate change, AI, automation. Like, we need to change our leadership style in general. But one of the things about vulnerability is asking people, what do you need? What is your situation? And very few organizations do that because it's scary. But if you do, you actually find some really easy things you can put in place.
When you think about like getting pushback, when you get pushback from people, and you like bringing that back around to the almost the what's in it for me, like why would I take a vested interest in what you're doing? Like, what's some of the responses, or how do you pitch that back to people?
Well, diverse organizations outperform on virtually every business measure. So that's from profitability to their brand value to employee engagement, like every measure, customer satisfaction. And you can see the reasons why. Diverse teams make better decisions. They have a lot better collaboration, communication, understanding, connection with the customers, all that sort of stuff. So at a high level, if you are a top senior executive of a company, this is a no-brainer for sustainability. And we know that this research, which has been done over the last 10 years on multiple different occasions, all of it points to the same stuff. And that's led to organizations like the NASDAQ. I think the Japanese Prime Minister, I think he's Prime Minister, is he President? Prime Minister, has just implemented and enforced a 30% quota. They have started to get quotas for women in top leadership positions because it's imperative for the sustainability of organizations going forward. That is now no longer even in dispute. Like, everyone's jumped on board. We get it. But individually, and this is the tough thing, if you're a person in an organization, and especially if you're a white man who probably does feel a little bit like the rest of the world's been getting so much support, and things are being taken off you, or that you are being overlooked, we think there's probably three things that you can we can point to very easily. Firstly is improved team dynamics. There is often a big disconnect in the way people communicate and interact with each other. Talking about feedback, talking about challenging conversations. When you equip women with the ability to navigate these situations on their terms and get the confidence and some tools to do it, your team dynamics improve. You're no longer in these scary situations where you're like, I don't know how to give her feedback, because she will proactively ask for it, and she will learn how to rely on her support network, her peer group, to be able to grapple with the feedback rather than maybe reacting in the moment the way that you're afraid of her reacting in the moment. So you've got that. I think stakeholder management is another key one, that when you have diverse leadership styles and you understand different ways people communicate and their different things, women will behave differently. They're equipped with those skills. So there is a lot of perceptions at the moment. There's a lot of on one leadership style, but if you build the capability to be able to manage your manager, to be able to interact with your manager in a different way, it's going to be far more compelling and interesting and productive, really. And then the third one is generic productivity. Like, most people have a big blocker in their career right now, and it's taking up a lot of their mind space, and they are often feeling quite stuck with it. You can unblock that. What does that do for productivity? So there are tangible benefits for everyone by just giving targeted support that caters to women's unique challenges. That comes back and pays dividends for the people around them too.
Man, there's so much in there. That's cool. I love it.
My head's been in this for 6 months.
Awesome. When you're thinking about, what you're seeing within organizations that's supporting this, like what's working? When you're seeing like big shifts with people, or big shifts either individually or at an organization level, what are the things that are working? And what are the things that you go, you know what, we should be, somebody else should be replicating this?
There are some organizations who've nailed it, and I think, and when I say nailed it, there's always going to be challenges. At Hatch, we built diversity in our DNA. So we had about 50% of our people had come from overseas. We had a 50-50 gender mix at virtually all levels. I think there were different teams that had different slants, but overall, and we attribute that to our success. Like the challenge of ideas, the way we had multiple different perceptions and lived experiences enabled us to grapple with things so much more robustly. I look at organizations like Xero who are doing pretty well, and I imagine on individual levels there's some struggles, but overall having visible senior leaders who are women, and I know at Hatch that was a big draw card for us, that people wanted to work in an organization that had visible senior women. So visibility, like it's easy. Have visible leaders who are, and also really encourage diverse opinions. We spent a lot of time on rather than, and I've learned about, I don't know if you've learned the dangerous animals of product development.
No.
I learned everyone should look it up. But this idea of opinion-based decision making and that idea of the loudest voice in the room versus curious decision making and really going out and exploring ideas. Like embedding a culture of that works really well, because we've all seen those organizations who put out a product that it's like, what? Why would you do that? Who was it? I think it was Peloton, where they had an ad that was like, get your mother a Peloton for Mother's Day, and it's like, oh, I don't know if women want to be told to do more exercise on Mother's Day, like, and that was just overlooked because they did not have this really robust, diverse, curious decision-making model. So those two things I think are very easy things to implement quite quickly.
Nice. And what about low-hanging fruit?
Low-hanging fruit. Well, I think there's all sorts of small habits. Firstly, if you're a woman, build your professional network. Set aside a date with your friends to actually spend an hour talking about your work challenges. That feels like, and if you're an organization, allow for that. Secondly, I think if I was a manager, I would make sure that every person in my team has an hour or half an hour a week dedicated to professional development. And that can be as easy as spending some time reading or listening to a podcast in work hours. So women who are juggling children, caregiving, household responsibilities aren't trying to figure this out outside of work hours. Make time and value professional development and learning and upskilling in these areas. And then I think if you are in a meeting environment and we should all be paying attention to who's speaking the most. At the moment I am, but
that's cool. People are sick of hearing my voice anyway. That's what I hear.
But if you are speaking the most, make sure that you pay attention and see, wait a second, are there any voices in this room who haven't been heard? And one of the key things that women often struggle with is they'll have an idea and then someone else will repeat it and get the credit. Amplify. It's such a great, easy tool. Is if a woman has a great idea or a great suggestion, attribute it to her and amplify her voice. Repeat it, but make sure you attribute it to her. Make sure you celebrate that. These are really simple things, and it's not an exhaustive list. Subscribe to Powrsuit for more.
Yes, please.
We share them every week. There's thousands of small things we can all do every day. Be mindful about your stereotypes. Like, I do this all the time now. I catch myself going, oh, why did I think this person would behave like this?
Yeah.
What was my unconscious bias there? And how might I behave differently? And what would that mean if I walked into that situation believing that? How did that impact my behavior? So it's that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about, within that work environment, and, from my experience, what I've noticed as people come through my door is that women in general have found it quite difficult to say no. Like just say no without saying no sometimes, and arming people with the tools. Like in this kind of situation, use this particular technique. Why do you think that perpetuates? Why do you think that's continuing to come forward?
I love that question. So we've just done an article on that because firstly, women take on other people's problems too much and women struggle to say no strategically. That's a social thing. I think it's a social and cultural norm that we are expected to, and you see it even in little kids still, that like little girls are like, oh, I should jump in and solve this, or I get praised for taking on more stuff. But there's such easy breaks for that. So the problem solving one, we've actually just talked about the concept of a committee, which my friend told me about, that she started saying, I'm not on that committee when people came to her with problems. And in her head, she didn't say it out loud, but by phrasing it as but a problem is a project and there's a committee on the project. And when someone comes to you with that project, you get to decide if you want to be on that committee. And if you do choose to be on that committee, there's actually more roles than problem solver. You could be the cheerleader. You could be the person that goes, you've got this, I back you, because that's often all someone needs. You can be the person who's the coach and asks a bunch of questions to figure out what their real problem is. There's a bunch of different roles outside of just taking it on and solving it, which in all honesty, not everyone wants all the time as well. So that's like, again, very, very simple tools to change that. The strategic no's is another very easy one where we feel, and actually there is some stats around this as well, that women are unfairly disadvantaged when we say no to taking on stuff at work, whereas men are seen as busy, so it's fine. But learning how to say yes to the right opportunities, so that's if you've got an opportunity to visibly show value in the organisation, and we can be a bit scared to do that because it's taking a risk, and failure, again, there's often an unfair burden on women, but failing, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Absolutely.
So jump in and do it. And saying no, you can say no. I mean, a lot of people say no as a complete sentence, and I agree, but that's not always politically okay. If it's coming up with different solutions, asking questions around how would I balance this? Is it as important as some of the other stuff I've got on my plate? And really having those conversations around it is another great thing to do. And then saying yes to stuff. Women are responsible for about a month more a year of invisible work at work.
Oh
so that's
so much.
I know.
Oh my God.
That's committees, that's employee engagement, employee welfare, social club activities. We take on a lot of this work, and it's invisible. It's non-promotable. Make it promotable. This stuff is vital. It's business critical. This is culture we're talking about, and this is huge. Employee engagement. Do you know how much it costs to, like, when you lose people and have to rehire? This is incredibly valuable work. So if you do want to put your hand up, make sure the value is known. Make sure you're having those conversations with your manager regularly. Make sure it's included in performance reviews. Make sure you're really vocalizing, because we sometimes tend to think our work speaks for itself, and it doesn't. Everyone's busy.
That's right.
No one's paying minuscule attention to everything you do. Highlight it. Bring it up in your one-on-ones. Make sure it's something that you discuss, and you may find out that it's not strategically important, and then you should probably stop doing it.
Absolutely agree. When you think about, because there's quite a broad spectrum of target audience that you could say, because everybody's going to benefit from this, right? But who would you say is this is your immediate target audience right now?
Yeah, we think probably the searchers and scouts, so those two, the second and third style that I told you about. So they are extremely capable, they are ready, they're willing to take an opportunity, and there's just these different barriers in their path. But we are so early stage that one of the joys of what the pilot we're offering is it's actually about unblocking your biggest challenge. So really the challenge for us is to get 6 to 8 women who are very similar in a similar situation in a room, and really create a space for them to be able to. And we've done this twice already, and it was amazing to throw out the challenges, then, you dig and find the real challenges, and then flip the script and get this group problem solving and coming away with concrete actions. And in both situations, incredible light bulb moments. Change from feeling maybe quite vulnerable and powerless and overwhelmed to feeling confident and in control. So for us at the moment, we're just testing different things with different audiences, and we may find one naturally resonates more. But we've created a framework almost that's flexible enough that you just have to make sure the group resonates with each other, because they should be each other's accountability coaches and supporters as they go back out into the world.
Yeah, totally. And so this is kind of not say a ground up approach, but if you look at the individuals and you're putting the seekers and the scouts together, as opposed to saying targeting organizations, not zero, but like a zero, and just saying, actually, this is what should be happening. So this is where you feel that the best use of time is like growing these groups, empowering them, connecting them, and then that'll help make the change at that organization level.
We think for us, I mean, there's amazing top-down approaches that, governments are putting in place, organizations are putting in place. For us, our experience uniquely suits us to being able to work closely with women. We've made it in against the odds, and I say that in a modest way, in that if you look at companies, startups, 2% of startup money goes to women founders, and we exited from ours. So we are the exception to the rule. We've learnt what it takes. We've built our own playbook. So that is the skills we can pass on. We also believe great structural change comes from within. And so we used to say disrupt from the inside, but that's terrifying for a lot of people. So we're actually all about taking up more space. So if we can have 8 women go back out into the world and take up more space with their style and enable other women to take up more space, then suddenly these styles are more visible. These leadership approaches are more visible. And that has such big knock-on effects. As I'm sure you know those, that when you start to have little changes in dynamics, then that leads to other changes. So we feel that's where we're specifically best positioned, but that doesn't mean we're the only solution. I think there's got to be a bunch of them to make a change. The stats are dire, 10%, 10% of women CEOs. We're 50-50 at entry-level jobs, and the stats just keep changing from there. We call it, I don't know if you've heard of the broken rung.
No.
So that's the first management step. So for every 100 men who are promoted into the first management role, only 87 women are. So from that first step up, yeah. And so it's not about women who don't want to take on more serious roles at the senior level because they don't have time. It's not about lack of ambition. It's right there from that first step. And most organizations we've spoken to feel the same, and they've experienced it. That's what their organization looks like. So we think, yes, there's structural change, but it has to come from equipping women with the playbook to navigate so that they're in control of their careers.
Yeah, kind of bring it back to some of the things that you described, like a suite of resources, a suite of tools and a suite of actions that people can implement. And then thinking about like what your space is within all of that, with Powrsuit and your experience, and then potentially there being, I don't know, another group that take the lead with Māori or whatever that looks like, that allows them to resonate more closely with that audience, and having this like multifaceted approach. I love that. I love the idea of that as well. When you think about, how each of those, let's say there's I'll just like use a Powrsuit for Māori or a Powrsuit for overseas Pacific Islanders or recently arrived migrants or whatever that looks like. How would that, like in a utopian world, how would that all integrate together so that there's kind of this one voice, there's this one message that's bringing us, rather than, it's those two white women again?
Yes.
What does that look like?
That's a really great question. So we see Powrsuit as, and I know we're so early stages at the moment, so we're talking about manual trials, but we believe we're going to build a platform that is going to enable millions of people to access what they need when it comes to professional development. So that's in like 6 months' time. But for now, it is manual. So when you think about the platform approach, it's not about Kristen and I running this. It's about creating the tools and frameworks that other people can apply. So we're not coaches. We're not going to be the coaches on this. So the the approach we can use is proactively seeking diversity. So we have made a real point of recognizing that we are 2 white women. And so we have gone out of our way to speak to a lot of different people from different diverse backgrounds and understand what they would need, but also ask for their opinion on what our approach could be or how would they approach it. So what we hope to do is very quickly go, this is what we can do, but we are also bringing in people and celebrating those people for what they can bring to the situation and what they could, if we're setting up a cohort, for example, and a Māori cohort, like a Māori woman cohort, who would be best placed to run that, and who would be best placed, and what would we need to tweak to make this scalable framework that just different groups can, and should it be restricted to one culture, or is there actually benefit of Pacifica, Māori, someone maybe from the US, or a bunch of people coming together and recognizing their differences and similarities as well? All of that is TBD, but we know that is a thing that we do not, we spoke from day one. One of our principles is we don't like the patriarchy. No one should like the patriarchy. The worst possible outcome for us is that we create the new patriarchy by lifting white women up and leaving everyone else behind. So we have to be super aware of that and put in place whatever we can put in place at each point to make sure we're thinking broadly and we're getting, we're asking for and getting and making sure we pay for the help we need to make sure we have a diverse approach that's inclusive for a whole range of different groups.
Yeah, fair enough. New Zealand's quite a small place, right? So you see much regional differences at all, or is there, I would assume there's industry and sector differences, but...
No, actually, there's not really. We've started speaking to a couple of companies in Australia and over in the US because we want to be global from day one. And there's definitely cultural differences in different countries, social differences. But really, the thing with the woman leadership gap is it's just universal. And so while there are maybe different nuances, there's enough in common to go, okay, we can really tackle a lot of it universally. And I expect as we reach our 5th millionth person joining the platform, we will have to be really careful to make sure we're really curating to the individuals, and that is a future problem for us or a future challenge for us to solve. But at the moment, it feels very much like, one big problem and a lot of nuance in it.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm pretty sure it was a Powrsuit email that I saw, the newsletter, and it had, I feel like it was, and it had like the names of the top, I don't know, 100 CEs or the...
Oh, yeah.
Was that you guys?
Women have finally outnumbered Johns.
John, that's what it was.
There's this great, I should share it with you, there's this great comeback from this incredibly clever social media group, and it's all the Johns combining in a committee to go, how do we get back on top? But yes, for the first time ever, women CEOs outnumber CEOs named John in the biggest companies, the 500 biggest companies in the world.
That is insane.
21 of the 500 CEOs are called John. I think it's 21 and 41 are women. 41 out of 500.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congrats. Gosh. That's stuck in my mind when I saw that. I was like, I couldn't remember.
Yeah, well, someone actually released that stat years ago. There's one other time I think it was Michael's that we outnumbered, but we haven't outnumbered any one man's name ever, apart from once for about a year. Which is just, and she found that stat, and just, there's something about the name thing that just really puts it in context. When you say 10%, and you're like, but when you're like, Johns make up about 4% of the population, and women 50%. How should they even be close in terms of representation?
Yeah, that's right. I like it. I love the image, and like I said, it's stuck in my head too. So you kind of talked about some of the next steps. Where is the immediate next step for Powrsuit?
We are literally at the moment pitching to organisations because we are consulting on the side. We are half-time maybe on Powrsuit at the moment, and we're bootstrapping this, so we're doing some really cool innovation work for some really cool companies, but we want to focus full-time on Powrsuit in the coming months. So we are pitching to organisations our manual pilot, which is a one-day workshop with selection of women. We also want Powrsuit to be opt-in. We don't want, there's a lot of politics around being told you have to go on a course, or some people getting to go and other people don't, so we have to work that out. But a one-day workshop that really takes you through a mini version of what we think might end up being our digital proposition, or the very early stages of it. So we've talked to about 3 companies so far, had great conversations. They sound very excited, sent them a bit of follow-up, but that's been in like the last 2 days. So we've got another week of that, and then I'm going on holiday for 2 weeks, and then hitting the ground running when we come back.
Awesome. Where's the holiday?
Bali. I'm going with my whole family.
Oh, good on you.
Yeah.
For the whole 2 weeks?
Yep, 2 weeks, and it's got both my parents, my sister with 3 of her children, me and my girlfriend, and my sister's partner.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it'll be a wild group.
Totally. I just wanted to acknowledge that you mentioned it's bootstrap, right? So for anybody who's not familiar with startup jargon, what is bootstrapping?
Oh yes, bootstrap just means we're funding it ourselves at the moment. So we are paying for everything, doing all the work. It's just 2 of us doing all the work at the moment. And the reason for that is we both feel quite strongly that you really want to nail what we call, add more jargon, product market fit, which is basically that your product is so perfect for your audience that you technically shouldn't have to do any marketing because they're telling everyone about it and people are signing up and knocking down your door and you're struggling to keep up to date with supporting them. So we want to figure out, get as close, that's a theoretical state. I don't think it ever actually happens to that degree, but we want to get as close to that as possible so that if and when we take on funding, we are taking on funding to grow a thing that works. If we took on funding now, yes, it might speed up a bit, but it also removes some constraints, which I think make you make better decisions, because constraints can be creative.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So you really have to focus on priorities. You can't throw money at the problem. You have to throw intellect and experiments, and so that's where we're at.
That's really kind. I want to just kind of flag that again, because it was just acknowledge and celebrate the fact that this is coming off your own back, right? Like you don't have this massive private backer who's going, here's wads of money, go do the thing. It's like, actually, this is something you believe in so firmly that you're prepared to put your own your hard-earned money, your blood, sweat, tears, all the rest into this.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's very cool. Pardon me, you've mentioned a couple of times Kristen.
Yes.
Cool. Who's Kristen?
Oh, Kristen is my co-founder. So we started Hatch together about 6 years ago as strangers with two other co-founders. We had 2 men, 2 women. That was accidental, actually, but we're amazing powerhouse team. We had such a great time together. Kristen and I, that's probably the best working relationship I've ever had by far. We're really, really good friends. We have a great time together. We left Hatch at the same time, and we both believe so strongly in Powrsuit, and we came up with the idea together, all of that sort of stuff. So we spend way too much time talking to each other. We're both in relationships with people whose names start with Kai, so we call them the Kais, and they are our support team, and they have to drop us at the airport and pick us up and deal with us all the time, cook for us. But we just have a blast, and one of our other principles, other than making sure we bring diversity into this, is that we have to have fun, because we love working together. We think one of the joys of, circling back to the beginning of this conversation, designing your life on your terms, is we should enjoy every moment of this, because there's hard patches, there's challenges, but if we can stick together and play on each other's strengths, and we are definitely a 1 + 1 = 3 duo. Awesome. We build on each other, we challenge each other, we often don't agree, which is one of the powerful parts of our relationship. So yeah, we're in this one together too, with a lot more combined experience behind us this time.
Yeah, hard-earned experience too.
Yeah.
Do you still look at yourselves and say, oh mate, I'm probably this style at the moment? Like, do you still and where do you feel like you are in that?
I probably switch between the Scout and the Pathfinder. I think there are times where, and it's funny doing this job, people look to you as this real, you know what you're doing all the time. And then I realized that sometimes I don't feel like I really know what I'm doing. So I think I do switch between them. But yeah, I think, and I'm sure Kristen would probably say the same. I think there's been times in my life that I've been a trailblazer and gone, nah, gender hasn't impacted me. And then, have something happen and go, oh yeah, that's right.
And I just lost my train of thought there. That's actually bang on, like just hearing it and then kind of reeling you back and saying, oh, actually, this is how now that I've heard that, it does allow me to reflect and say, oh, maybe that did have an impact on me. When you think about the people who you are starting to, so the people that are being naturally drawn to you guys, because, you're very successful, you've got this thing going on, and then people looking at you and they're saying, oh, I would like to understand more about what Natalie's doing. Like, how are they finding their way to you? Because you've got LinkedIn, right? And it's obviously, that's how I caught on to you. Or that's how you pushed into the radar, and I said, oh my God, this is amazing. But how are other people actually finding you? Like, how are the people that, did you say the Seeker and the Scout?
Yeah.
Like, where are they finding you?
We actually don't know who our audience is at the moment, because it's all through a podcast and newsletter, and we don't collect a lot of information. We've done one survey a few months ago. But one of the early tests we wanted to do is, if we start putting this information out there, do people find it useful? So what we find is every week when we send out a newsletter, we get a bump in sign-ups because people are sharing it. And we've had people self-report they've shared it with their entire team, saying we're going to do this exercise this week, or so cool. They put it on an intranet or Slack channel, or they shared it with friends. So we actually, and that's our first test sort of tick, is what we're putting out is valuable enough that people share it, and for us that's more important than paying to get acquisition at this point, where we're not quite sure if it's resonating with people. So this is proving it's resonating.
Cool.
So it's very organic, and we haven't spent a cent on marketing. It's we've got Instagram, we've got podcast, we've got newsletter, we've got LinkedIn, largely our channels. I think Kristen plays around with Pinterest and Twitter, but haven't had much luck there. But yeah, it's just people telling each other at the moment and really sharing the Powrsuit vision and believing in it, which is actually, funnily enough, how we started Hatch too. We identified our first core customers, and they were effectively part of our team. Our first 1,000 customers were the biggest advocates for Hatch, because we've really worked with them, and we're doing it now with Powrsuit as well, because I just think it's the only way to start a business is find your tribe, and they are your free sales channel, but they're also building the product alongside you and getting the thing that they need. So it's awesome. It makes sense to me.
Awesome. You mentioned self-doubt, limiting self-talk, that kind of thing. How do you overcome that?
Well, we've actually had a bit of a breakthrough in the last couple of weeks because we did an episode on our podcast about it, and so we challenged ourselves to spend the week thinking about ours. And I've done it a couple of years ago, and I swore black and blue I didn't have any because I was like, I'm so confident, I'm fine, and then was drowning in them by the end of the week of paying attention. I think evidence is my biggest one, is why do I have this belief? And it's often a flippant comment from someone, or you've interpreted a reaction and you've built a story for it, and you've now embedded this belief as a fact. So I actually forced myself to sit down and think about evidence for it, like writing a pro and con list almost of like, what makes me think I have this, and what would be the case if it wasn't true, and what else could it be. I'm also a very open book about feedback, so I'll often just ask people. My only thing is I think shame is the absolute worst emotion, and there's been a couple of times in my life that I feel so ashamed of something, a self-limiting belief, that I'm too scared to ask someone, which is, and then of course you finally pluck up the courage and they're just like, what are you on about? But I think evidence is good, and that's where these peer groups come in. Surround yourself with people who aren't blindly going to tell you what you want to hear, but who are you can trust, because they're sometimes going to give you some very nicely formed constructive feedback, so you really can trust them when they say, no, this is not a thing for you.
Yeah, it's even hard. You can build up this body of evidence that tells you this is inaccurate, this perception that you have, but you can still like override that, right? There's this point in your brain that just says, actually, I'm, even in spite of all that evidence, I'm that's wrong, and I'm this thing because of somebody telling me this thing when I was 13 years old, or whatever it might be. Yeah,
so, and we have, is that a negativity bias? I'm a big fan of psychology, and I think it's a biological benefit when we were, living in caves, that you always assumed the worst. But now we still carry that because we can't tell the difference. So you can get 5 really great pieces of feedback, but you'll walk away remembering the one very minor negative thing someone said about you and blow that up out of proportion. So I know that's a thing we do. So you just have to sort of go, oh, is it? Yeah. But then also, the other thing that I realized is I'm not perfect. I don't know if you are, but I've decided, I've realized that I'm not. And so I'm actually cool with having flaws, and I'm cool with things that I'm not very great at. And I'm cool to recognize, it's actually okay that I talk too much, or that I'm a bit loud, and that I don't always get the situation and the social cues right. Like, I know that about myself, but I also surround myself with people who love me for that. And so
nice, absolutely. Wow, where to next? So what's next for you?
Well, we other than a holiday and getting this pilot out, when I come back, we're going to sit down and look at what we call the consumer-facing proposition. So we've identified, and I'm not going to be able to remember them now because we've put this down about 3 weeks ago, 7 ideas that we have for how we might do something very, very small that we would get individuals to pay for. So maybe $20 a month, $10 a month, sort of the price of a TV subscription, that would start to test whether or not we can add value quickly, and that and sort of coming at it then from an organizational side and then from a consumer side. So that's a big one. And that's probably the next big thing. We're actually part of an accelerator at the moment as well, which is a thing that startups go into. That's a 3-month program, and it's designed to accelerate the speed of your business growth. So to put in place some great mentors, coaches and programs to get you from A to B faster. So we've got, when I come back, 2 days after I come back from Bali, we're flying down to Christchurch to do a pitch. This is a pitch for investment, but kind of it's sort of like fake investment because it's part of the accelerator, but there will be investors there. So it's sort of a little bit of a pitch competition, but it's to get practice pitching. Cool. And so we have to put that together while I'm away, I think. So yeah, a lot of cool stuff coming up.
Nice. Who's hosting the accelerator?
It's called Ministry of Awesome, and it's for women startups, because as I said, 2% of funding goes to women, but there's also, amongst all the other gaps, a massive gap in women-founded companies and tech companies. So this accelerator is designed to really support women and really cater to the different needs of women, very similar to Powrsuit, but when it comes to startups. So it's a group of really cool companies. There's actually 2 cohorts. There's everything from a woman who is incredible, who started a plus-size activewear range because she found that a lot of the current activewear is quite exclusive, and so she's got this beautiful brand. I'm amazed at what people can do, with physical products. There's some really cool conservation stuff around reusing packaging and cutting down on packaging. There's just some financial literacy stuff. There's just some really cool companies, and again, it's created a peer network for us because we've got this tribe of supporters all the way through to actually flight compliance and safety. So we've got this incredible group of incredible women and men, actually, because they often have male co-founders who, we're just having a great time with that as well.
Nice, very nice. Man, you've got a full suite of activity coming up on your horizon. Love the fact that you're taking some time out for yourself as well. Just to decompress. I'm assuming it's going to be like a decompress, recharge the batteries kind of holiday, not the holy cow, I need another holiday.
No. Do you do that? Do you take holidays?
I don't feel like I do. What do? I get out a lot. By getting out, I do a lot of hitchhiking, and so
You hitchhike?
Yeah. It's my way of like disconnecting.
Oh my god, I couldn't do that. I'd be connected.
Yeah. We've actually got a hitchhiker. She's back staying with us tonight. Today's Friday, so we've got a French hitchhiker. This is her third or fourth time staying at our place. I understand like one of the passions that she has for it. We've had 3, I think, stayed in the last fortnight, maybe 3 weeks.
So wait, you meet people hitchhiking in cars and they end up staying with you?
Well, we'd never met these people before they stayed at our house.
So it's hitchhiking, but it's also like couch surfing kind of thing?
So I think what they're doing is she flew over from France and then she was hitchhiking through the country. And then my wife, who used to be really risk averse, she's less so, but still in that kind of space.
Is it risk averse or risk aware? Risk might be a bit different for her when it comes to hitchhiking.
A bit of both. So I think what she found was that because I was going out and hitchhiking, it kind of made things start to make a bit more sense. Like she was this complete fear of the unknown. Like, you watch a movie, you go out hitchhiking, either the hitchhiker kills somebody or they get killed.
Everyone dies.
Everyone dies. It's never a good ending. But I started to do it a lot more. One of the things I love about it was just being able to meet people in situations that I ordinarily wouldn't meet people in. Mm-hmm. And the way I describe it is that, I'll be standing on the side of the road and there's some small part of my brain will be thinking, please don't kill me. Please don't kill me.
Yeah.
And some small part of their brain will be thinking, please don't kill me.
Or I'm going to kill him.
Either either. It's one of the two, right? And then you find that when you get into the car and you have this person's open up their safe space to you, you have an accelerated position of trust.
True.
And so the conversations that you have with people are intense. They are so out of there that you think... And the first time I started having these conversations, I thought, wow, this is just mind-numbing that this person is carrying this much weight. Yeah. But then you start to see it unfold again and again and again and again, and then you realise it's, I think everybody at some stage is carrying a lot of baggage.
Oh, yeah. And
you watch people when they're driving, and they'll example, one lady told me that she had cancer and she hadn't been able to tell her family, and she just, and just watching it all just kind of fall off her shoulders. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, wow, that's amazing that so many people are having this kind of experience and that I can now help people with this just by doing something that I really enjoy doing as well. So I love the whole hitchhiking aspect. I love I often know when I'm waking up, what I'm going to eat, who I'm going to be meeting with, But when I'm on the side of the road, all of that goes out the window. And so I get this massive thing out of it, but then I also get to share in this moment with a person.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really buzzy. It's a bucket fill for me.
That's amazing. But also it's so interesting, it points to that thing of we just don't have these vulnerable conversations enough. And we turn these challenges into these big, scary, internal things, and just the power of talking about things.
Absolutely.
And in that situation, I love it. I'm never going to do it, but I love it.
I tell you what, I've heard a few people say they're never going to do it, and they're slowly getting to the point.
Never say never.
Never say never.
You're right.
But these, so the lady that's staying with us tonight, she was hitchhiking, and then Debbie, my wife, said, oh, well, why don't you stay at our place? And I think it was because she'd seen me go out hitchhiking and I was doing things right, that it kind of, I understand this a bit more. Yeah. I get what's happening here. So now we've got people staying with us.
That's funny, because I actually used to rent out my spare room on Airbnb years ago when it first launched here. And I was one of the few, and so I had one bathroom in my house, so it would be sharing a bathroom, sharing a lounge. that have their own room. And yeah, it's funny now reflecting on that, and it's probably quite similar because I didn't know anything about these people I was inviting into my house. But because it was through Airbnb, I was like, they'll probably not. Like, it changed the mindset, right? It was just slightly different thing. And you're right, I had some incredible conversations and met some incredible people. Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you're sharing a safe space.
It is amazing. Before we wrap up, I was really keen on hearing some practical tools that people can use, because I love your newsletter. It's one of the things that when I read through it, sometimes I might just jump straight to the bottom to get the thing, and then I'll go back to the top, right? And I love the bite-sized practical actions that people can take to help with reducing stress or amplifying their voice or whatever it may be. So I thought I'd ask pitch to you a couple of, didn't mean to use the word pitch, situations. Yeah. Here's my slide deck, and just hear your thoughts on what's something a person can do if they're in that situation.
Excuse me if I don't have the answers.
No, that's all good. So, you often talk about, in these meeting environments, and you have somebody and they're not able to get their voice heard. What's something that somebody can do? Maybe they're quite softly spoken or a bit, introverted, whatever it might look like. What is a practical thing that somebody can do in those situations?
I think the meeting standard at the moment is that it's almost, and Kristen and I talked about a couple of bad habits where people just kind of keep repeating the same things or going around in circles or talking about the same things. So one thing I think you could do is have very clear agendas, and in that agenda have a round table of ideas, potentially could be a thing of everyone gets to speak. The other thing, and this was from Kathy Wood, I believe it is, who started Elevest, which is an investing company in the US, and she said she learned very quickly it's not necessarily about having a voice heard. That's sort of that feedback again of how do you action that? She said stay quiet until you have a view that's different from everyone else's view in the room, because that's where you add the most value and that's where you'll be heard. So rather than join the fray of everyone saying the same thing over and over again, what is your contrary belief, or what is your unique experience that you can bring to the table, and then speak on that when there's a chance. If you're pointing to specifically how do you break into the conversation, I don't think you do it in the meeting. I think you do it pre and post the meeting, and you set the standard, or you ask the organizer to say, hey, is it possible to make sure, could we change the way we do it to a hand raise, or how can we make it more inclusive, and actually pre-arrange how you might do a meeting.
Very cool.
I actually had a great tip from someone the other day that they said at the end of every meeting now everyone has to hold up a hand from 0 to 5 to rate the value of the meeting, and if it was a 3 or less, the organizer had to follow up with those people and find out why they found it not valuable. So to me, it's never about the moment, it's about the pre and post and what you put in place to make sure you are getting those range of opinions.
Yeah, it sounds like you're setting up a structure.
Yeah, and that's a strategic hand up. And I would suggest moving away from my voice isn't being heard, because a few people have said that to me and I'm like, I don't really know what to do with that. But if it's how do we make sure we get a variety of opinions, or how do we make sure at this point that we are having a more robust conversation, that it's not just two people going back and forth, and really starting to set doing things up like that.
Very cool. Very cool.
That's probably 4 tips. Sorry.
Perfect. Load them up. How knowing how to say no. What are some ways that people can, particularly if they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling they're carrying more than they should be, what are ways that people can say no?
So I think there's 2 situations here. One is when someone comes to you with a problem. Easiest thing to do in that situation is not assume they want you to help them, and just say, how can I best support you? And you'll probably find 9 times out of 10, they didn't need you to do much. They just wanted to vent or they wanted you to give them a bit of a confidence boost. So you've actually immediately avoided even taking on the work without having to say no to it. If someone comes to you asking for you to do something, first, so you don't have to accept on the spot, I think is the first thing. Buy yourself some time and just say, thanks, can I get back to you on that? Then go away and think, what is my priorities at the moment? Does this fit into it? Is this a strategic yes? Does this have strategic value for the organization? But also selfishly, and I don't mean selfishly in a bad way, you should be selfish when you're thinking about your career. Is this adding value to my career? And then get back to them with your answer. And you can politely decline things, or you could say, I would love to. Again, I don't think no is a full sentence, and I think sometimes when people come back with I'm too busy, I don't know how well that plays. Whereas if you say I've got these specific priorities that I need to get done by the end of the week, I can fit this in later, or do you think it's as important as these 3 things, and really get to specifics with it, because I think some of those overused I want my voice heard, or I'm too busy statements, they kind of just frustrate people
Yep.
versus what is the specific thing. And I suppose going back to your first one is, if you had a thing to say at a meeting and you didn't say it, actually follow up later saying, this was my specific thing I wanted to say, is probably better than just sort of generic statements.
Yep. One of my favorites is, I love using this, we use this with the kids as well, is tell me the 4 different ways that you've tried to solve this problem.
Oh, yeah.
And, just putting it back on them. So, well, you kind of want me to invest my time here, but if you haven't even bothered trying to address it or solve it or even think about it, then it's not really worth my time. Come back to me when you've invested time in it as well.
Absolutely, and that's actually a great tip. And we put that into place with someone a while ago that they were feeling overwhelmed, and we just said, again, it's not in the moment, it's pre and post the moment. Set the expectation of, I'm not going to help anyone with their problems unless they have at least one solution they've come up with, and then we'll talk about that. And it just changes the mindset, and it changes, you teach people how to treat you, and it changes, if you're going to always take on other people's problems, they're not mean for assuming that they can just pass them over to you. You've just taught them that that's the thing that they do.
You're really supporting that behaviour. How can a person talk about themselves? We often talk about that first impression. A person comes around, hi, my name's Eddie, and this is what I do. Like, how can a person strengthen that first impression that they make?
That is something that women don't do enough, and I'm not great at it either. We talk about it as an elevator pitch, which is startup land, is that you're stuck in an elevator with someone, you've got 30 seconds to explain who you are and why you add value, and in startup land, that's like for your business, and hopefully you're in an elevator with an investor or a big customer. But think about it personally. What is the value you add to the world? Who are you? And especially if you have an ask at the moment, what's your ask? Is it, I'm looking to connect with people in this area, or I'm looking for new opportunities, whatever it is, and actually hone it. And we put up a template in a newsletter a while ago, and we actually had a bunch of women coming back to us, and they'd filled out the template for themselves and had started to really hone. It's not every situation, it's not the same. Like you just start to get a structure and you adapt it to the situation. So you might have one when you're in a meeting, because that's my worst case, because I think I'm an introvert, but when you go around the circle in a meeting and they're like, introduce yourselves, and I never know what to say. So that one would be quite different from when you meet someone at a party or a networking event. But you just sort of start to build them up and really think about it. Again, spend half an hour, put it in your calendar, and actually spend half an hour going, what is the value I offer? Ask people, like, your workmates, what do you come to me for? What's the things that I offer? And just get like really comfortable practicing it and saying it a few times.
Awesome, I love
Make
this.
it conversational. You don't have to be like, hello, I am, like, say it how you'd say it, but make sure to touch those the things you add value for, and what your ask is and who you are.
Awesome. Thank you so much for today. I really appreciate this.
I had fun.
This has been amazing. Like, this is just so densely packed with
I know, I'm
value.
so sorry I talked too much.
Not at all. You don't need to apologise. Absolutely not. So how can people reach you?
We're at powrsuit.com. It's power without the E, Powrsuit, which is going to be how you spell it from now on once you start. Go there. You can get access to our podcast and our newsletter. We'd love people to subscribe. We love feedback. We love it when people talk to us. You can get all our Instagram, everything from there. So please go there and send us an email if you want to talk about anything, because we love having conversations.
Awesome. Now, I meant to ask this like off the bat. So, why Powrsuit? I don't think I've seen it.
Oh!
Yeah.
Well, we were actually, Kristen was on AI trying to figure out a name, because we were like, we need a name. I can't remember what we were doing. Oh, I think we were about to launch the newsletter, and we're like, we need a name. And I was thinking about other company names, and I was like, there was one that I thought was, I can't even remember what it was. And I was like, and suddenly Powrsuit popped into my head, because I was like, back in the 80s, women wore power suits. And actually it triggered a few women when we first pitched it, because they're like, oh, I never want to go back with the big shoulder pads and the brightly coloured.
I've got the look.
But we were like, part of the reason we've removed the E is we want to redefine a power suit. And so we've looked at power suits now as, Serena Williams, she puts on her tennis outfit and she is a powerhouse. And other women were like, don their sneakers rather than heels, and they can rock into a situation. So what is your power suit? Sort of like, what is your playbook? What's your armor? What's your thing that makes you feel at your best? And so we thought, this is a good, and initially a few people were like, oh no, it's got negative connotations. And then they've now seen it come out and they're like, oh yeah, I like it.
I love that. Fabulous. Natalie, thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. That's a wrap, folks. That's an absolute wrap.